How to learn CG and VFX without getting overwhelmed. So I wanted to share some key insights that I've spent thousands of dollars to acquire, going to events, classes, courses myself, as well as compact all of this down into an optimal form that we can apply and that you can utilize right now to begin applying this information to learn and retain tutorials, classes, and podcast, books, whatever it is that you want to learn. I think that a lot of us as artists go through a lot of training and we want to figure out, how do I really absorb it, how do I really understand it, and how do I make it stick? In other words, how do I retain that information so that way I remember it and take it with me beyond just watching that video. So I get asked this a lot: what's the trick to make information stick? How do you learn and retain new information? And what's the surefire way to retain new knowledge fast? So this is the system that I use for everything, so that way I can learn and retain all the information, so that way I can really focus more on personal growth. Let's get started. First of all, if you find this video valuable, make sure to subscribe to my channel, because I don't want you to miss out on a lot of high value visual effects tutorials and masterclasses that I'm going to be posting regularly over the next coming weeks. Finally, as you watch this video, make sure to share any key insights or other value bombs that you got while you watch this, as well as any questions that you have about the material too. So feel free to leave as many comments as you like as you go through this video. The critical thing about learning new information is to have a set goal to apply it all to. I think a lot of us make the mistake of deciding that we want to learn a new subject and we just start to read up everything, go through how the interface works, and a lot of basic information. By having a set goal as we go through it, we've got intent, but more importantly, we've got context. So as we go through everything that we're learning, everything that we're applying or trying to retain, we're connecting the dots to what we're doing. So if I were to want to blow up a building or whatever the effect might be, finally, the other thing is it'll allow us to connect the dots. All of the information will resonate, but on top of that, it will all come together. We'll be able to see how all of this connects. So it's really applicable to have all of this put in context by having that set goal that aligns with it. It's also important to have confidence in who you're learning from. That being said, I remember when I was at ILM, a lot of us went to Krav Maga. We were all learning that at nighttime, and it was a lot of fun, but I remember the first time that I went to class, I remember sitting there for an hour while the instructor talked about martial arts and doing all this stuff, and I just wanted to see him kill somebody just so I knew he was the real deal. I think that all of us want that person to prove who they are, so that way we're more confident that they're the right teacher for what we want to learn. I think a lot of ways that we all get burned when we learn training is we might go through a course and we go through every single step, and then magically we get to the very end, and in the very next video it goes from work in progress to final version, and there's a lot of missing steps where they magically made it a lot better and it all came together. So no matter what the training is, there's a lot of times where we feel kind of ripped off or don't get to see the final result. Nothing really connects all the way through. So as we go through a lot of training, it's important to find the right people, the right formula, the ones that we're confident are going to be the right people to show us how to get that result. This is why it's really important that when you're learning, it's better to find one or two platforms that you really trust and go all in on them, rather than trying to learn from 10 different resources and wondering why you've got too much information and you're suffering from paralysis analysis. So in other words, find that one or two people or learning platforms or courses, whatever it might be, that you want to learn from, and go all in on those. It's okay to go and Google solutions to a lot of things that you're trying to learn, but when it comes to really going in depth on a certain course, it's better to pick one or two that really resonate with you and make sense to you and go all in on them. Even with the best of the best people, if you're listening to too many people, sometimes the information that they say will really conflict with each other, and it's better to go down one path, one journey with that person that you really align with, and you notice that all the information that they share really resonates the most with you. Having a reason why we're learning this information is really critical, because otherwise we can start to go down a rabbit hole of learning too much information and stuff that isn't relevant to us. By setting that clear goal that we want to accomplish X, It means that everything that we're learning needs to align with that. We're trying to find a surefire solution to resolve that big issue, and everything should resolve around that, rather than trying to read the manual from one end to the other. All that information isn't going to be applicable, it's going to be too much, and it won't stick. So keep that in mind. Have a solid avenue that you want to go down. Also, by having a desired goal, it means that you can start to see yourself progressing as you go through it. If you say, I want to learn Maya inside out, by having a vague goal like, I want to learn Maya inside out, is not really going to help us, because it means that you're going to read the manual, you're going to go through every tutorial. You don't really know whether or not you know anything. If you set out with a goal of, I want to have a new building destruction shot for my demo reel, then everything that you're going to be learning will be aligning with that one thing. And it means not only will you have a direct path to go down, that you want to learn building destruction, you want to learn how to do all the glass, the smoke, the explosions, all the bits and pieces, and you know exactly what you need to learn and how it's going to relate to it, but you can start to see your progression as you go along. Rather than saying that I want to learn everything about 3D, you can't really measure that, but when you see your shot starting to come together, starting to look real, starting to get rendered and all the effects come together, that's when you can start to measure your progress as you get further through it. Okay, so that's really important, is to be able to measure your success as you continue to learn. Learning just in time rather than just in case is also another really critical thing to keep in mind. Otherwise, what happens is a lot of information doesn't stick because there's no relevancy around it, but more importantly, you're not pushing that urgency behind it too. When you're learning things just in time, it means that you're trying to solve that specific problem. So if I want to go and learn visual effects, it's better to have a goal that I need to get this done by next week, I need to have this shot on my reel, and that way you're going to get through it a lot quicker. There's Parkinson's law, which means a task will expand or shrink based on how much finite time is left to complete that task. In other words, I guarantee I'm going to get my taxes done the week before they're due, because they're not going to get done right now. In other words, we have tasks that need to be done immediately, we get them done. Things that need to be done with a much more paced out timeline will end up usually taking as long as that timeline has to stick. So keep that in mind, that with everything that we're learning, we want to make sure that we have goals in mind, we have a timeline in mind, and that way everything that we're doing is applicable and appropriate to that goal. And we also have a set timeline, so that way we crush it with a lot more urgency. Having also a specific goal in mind really helps, not only with the what, but also with the why. In other words, if I want to go get a job at ILM, as one example, then by setting out a path of, I want to learn everything about Maya as my goal, that's really not going to actually help me get closer to that goal. That's actually a serious example that I was emailed. Someone said to me, Allan, I want to get a job at ILM, so I'm going to learn Maya inside out. And realistically, learning Maya inside out is not going to help you get any closer to your goal. You might have more knowledge, but you're not demonstrating that knowledge. Instead, saying, I know that ILM is working on the next Godzilla movie, therefore, what I want to do is create a new visual effects shot that demonstrates building destruction and large-scale creature effects. Then that's something more specific and something that you could send to them and say, hey, I know you work on this new movie, I would love to be a part of the production. Here's an example of my work that might align with what you guys are doing. So in other words, having that specific goal allows you to align more with them, and it means that everything that you're doing will lead to that specific thing. It means that you know exactly what you want to learn to accomplish that. Learning the building destruction, learning the creature effects, all of these things. It means you're going to cut out all the noise and go for what exactly you need to get that task done. So rather than saying it's going to take me 5 years to learn Maya inside out, and then I still need to build a reel to show off what I can do, everything I'm going to be doing for the next couple of weeks will align with that one goal of, I need this shot to be in my reel to demonstrate this, this, and this. So when it comes to learning cloth and all these other things, I don't need to worry about that. I'm trying to get a job at ILM doing building destruction, so I need to learn dynamics, I need to learn atmospherics, I need to learn how to do particle systems, I want to learn how to do creature effects, so it might pertain to lighting, shading, other things that are around that one area. But by having that specific goal, I can cancel out 99% of the things that are irrelevant and focus on the stuff that really matters. Not only that, but as you go through it, if you're just doing tutorial after tutorial on random stuff, then you're not going to be pushing yourself in the same way. When you have that desired goal, a lot of questions are going to arise, a lot of things that you need to learn that maybe you thought you wouldn't need to have learned in the first place. So in other words, the more that you test yourself, the more that you're applying it towards something, the more that you're going to run into real case scenarios or problems that might have occurred otherwise. So again, the goal is everything. Having that eliminates the noise and allows everything to stick, and it challenges you and prepares you more for what the final outcome will be. So if you go into production, you're going to be more ready than you would have been if you just went through training without anything to apply it to. So hopefully that makes sense. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but this is really appropriate and really important to have that desired goal, to have that desired outcome, and that way everything is measurable as we progress through this. It's also really important to be passionate about what you do and fully immerse yourself in the environment while you're learning. So without being passionate about something, you're going to find every excuse not to do it. You can sit there and watch tutorials, but meanwhile your brain's going to start to veer off onto other things. You're going to watch tutorials and be like, man, I've only gone through 10 minutes, it feels like 10 hours. Everything is going to be resistance rather than being drawn in. So it's really critical to get excited or find a reason to be excited about this. So it's important, if you cannot find a way to get excited about the subject that you're doing, to reward yourself in a different way. Okay, so if I get through another hour of this grueling lesson, I get to go get a massage, or I get to go for a walk, or I get to have lunch only once I complete this thing. So whatever it is, it's really critical to keep that in mind as you go through, to find a way to make incentive behind what you're doing. And like I said, total immersion is really important too. When I'm learning a new subject, I like to have podcasts, I like to have videos playing in the background, I like to have a book that I'll be reading, everything I can do to apply all of this together. Because that little bit of information that resonates from little other platforms, all of it comes together. A lot of my students in my mentorship, what they'll do is they'll have my courses on their phone and they'll simply be waiting for a train. They'll start listening to the lessons while they're on a bus or while they're at work on their lunch break. They'll continue to immerse themselves in the training as they go through. I think it's so cool because, again, it's something that the more that you obsess with it, the more that you're excited about something, the more that you immerse yourself in it, the more that it's all going to resonate and stick a lot more than it would if you're sitting there with that full-on resistance, like, I don't want to learn this. So it's really critical to have that and to be passionate about what you're learning. Or at least, at the very least, have a reason why and have incentives around how to keep yourself sticking to it. Finally, having stakes is important as well. So in other words, just as much as I want to be excited about something, there needs to be repercussions for not achieving it. In other words, set that desired outcome, set that goal. I want to have that shot on my reel by the end of the week of the building being destroyed to send out to ILM. If I don't achieve this, then I got to punish myself in some way. Have some repercussions behind it, some motivation. In other words, I'm going to do this or else this is going to happen. I'm going to achieve this, otherwise I don't get to hang out with my friends this weekend, I'm going to be learning more tutorials. So it's my incentive to stick with this. I'm going to give a friend of mine $100 and he's only allowed to give it back to me if I have this shot done in time. Whatever that motivation might be. A lot of us tend to be more motivated by loss than we are by gain. So in other words, if we were to be given $100, if we were to get something done, that incentive isn't as effective as losing $100 would be. It's also proven that we work better with spaced learning. So the concept of spaced learning is to learn the same task a couple of times with gaps of time for it to marinate in between. But giving time for your mind to actually wrap itself around a problem that you're dealing with does give you more of a chance to really embrace it and figure it out. So rather than just being in it the entire time, stepping away occasionally and having a chance to think about it is an effective way to make the information stick and, more importantly, figure out problems that you're running into. So let's recap for a second. I want to learn a new subject, well, give myself a reason behind it. I want to learn Maya so that way I can get a job at ILM. Therefore, I decide I want to have this shot because I know this is going to be specifically what will give me that outcome. So I go and make a shot for my reel. That way I have a reason behind it, I have a what behind it, and therefore I give myself a timeline of 1 week to do that. everything that I'm going to be learning is going to be applicable specifically to that subject, which means I cancel out a lot of the noise, a lot of the distractions, a lot of the irrelevant information that might be valuable information for down the line, but right now I'm focusing on getting the results that I need for that desired outcome. So condensed timeline, having the what goal and the outcome and a way to measure it, knowing that it's a success if I have a finished shot by the end of the week. Having all of these things applicable will make it all stick. On top of that, some of the goals might be a little bit too big. It's very easy to say, I'm going to go do building destruction. So therefore, we need to break those down into subcategories and tackle each one of these. So maybe it is I want to go learn dynamics so that way I can destroy a building. But part of that is I need to figure out how to do all the fracturing. And then on top of that, I need to figure out, well, how do I make everything stick together, or doing joint systems or whatever it might be. Bit by bit, the really big questions that we're struggling to wrap our heads around, we break them down to smaller things. If I want to do a tsunami, maybe I need to figure out, well, how do I get the wave shape? How do I do all the foam? How do I do all the spray? How do I do all the white caps and all the textures? How do I do all the shading? What if I do all the fog around it as well? How do I get objects to sit in the water and buoyantly bounce around a little bit, and move around in the ocean? Each one of these things, as I break them down and deconstruct the bigger problem, all of these get answers, and it allows me to eventually rebuild the bigger problem with a solution. So whenever a task is too overwhelming, it's more about breaking it down into each and every one of those steps and figuring out how to do each and every one until you have a solution for everything. So with learning, it's more about proficiency versus being an expert. You become an expert over time, but right now when you have a desired goal and that's your thing, is that you want to be proficient at being able to do something. In other words, if I go and learn a subject with a desired outcome, the outcome or the goal is to be proficient at it enough to be able to do what I need to do. In other words, I want to be proficient enough at learning Spanish to have a conversation with someone, or proficient enough to be able to know how to navigate around the streets in Spain or wherever I want to be. I want to be proficient enough to get that job at ILM, and then from there I can continue to expand my knowledge. Where it's easy to go down that rabbit hole of trying to be an expert at something before you ever demonstrate that you can do it. So here's my process. Once I've done that, once I've set the goal, the desired outcome, so it's measurable, I've set the timeline, all of these different things, I've limited it to 1 or 2 training resources for my primary ways to learn all this stuff. All of these things, once that's all in place, what I'll typically do is this. I'll go through the training, if it's an option to do so, at 2x speed. The whole point is I want to sit back and just watch it as quick as I can and get a broad overview of all of this. If I'm reading, it's the same way that I'll read the back of the book, I'll read the table of contents very thoroughly to get a more general idea of what each and every chapter is about and generally what the entire book encapsulates. So once I have that, like if I've watched a video at 2x speed, watched it all the way through, I can see what we start out with, what are the general things that we go through. The more understanding I have about the entire process from that bird's eye view, then I can go in the trenches and start to get more in depth about doing it step by step and learning to replicate it. So it's really critical in the beginning to give context to what you're doing. So watch the video through entirely as quick as you can to fully understand what we're intending to do. And then from there, what I'll do is I'll go through the lesson properly and I'll take handwritten notes the entire time. Now, this is something that I want to talk about because this is a really critical part of the process, is handwritten notes over typing out notes. The reason for it is because it's a lot more intimate, the muscle memory between you writing something down and going through it rather than tapping it out verbatim. And the key thing is that by writing things down, usually what you'll be doing is you'll be taking the information they're giving you and you'll be translating that into what you're doing. So in this case, I would be writing down what they're saying, more generalizing or summarizing what the information is. If someone says, all the reasoning, all the information about a subject, I can take all that and summarize what that meant. And what that means is I'm actually having to translate that information in my brain to be able to put that down on paper. So rather than writing it down verbatim or typing it out verbatim, for me to summarize and understand it, it means I need to process that information and understand it myself to be able to then regurgitate that back out on paper. Maybe that makes sense, maybe it doesn't, but that is how you're able to make information stick, is to process it. It's the same way that I love to learn about something, fully immerse myself in a subject and learn everything I can about it, then I love to talk about it. I love to talk to other people and help them understand the process as well, because the more that I teach a subject, the more that it forces me to have to understand it fully myself before I can do that. So when I'm talking to people during the day about something I've been learning all about, I'm like, man, I've been learning all about this subject recently, it's so cool, blah, blah, blah. The more that I'm doing that, the more that I'm having to fully understand it myself to then have that desired output. So for them to understand it means I need to understand it. For me to understand it, I need to process it. For me to process it, it's better to write it all down, to translate it, to process it out, and put it on paper. The same way that we're all visual people, so keep that in mind too, that as you're writing down your notes, feel free to draw pictures and do things like that. I know some world-class speakers that will specifically draw little stick figures of what their talk's going to be, and that's literally their notes when they go on stage in front of 5,000 people. They don't have all their words or a teleprompter in front of them. They literally have these crazy little stick figures with a couple of words around them, and that's all they need. They can quickly take a glance at that and know exactly what they need to move on to next. So this can be really effective for you to write little diagrams and do little things like that as you're going through. It doesn't matter, but the whole point is that you're writing this down with pen and paper, whether it's words or pictures, to translate the outcome of what you just learned. Finally, from there, what I will do is I will type out a step-by-step lesson to myself based on those handwritten notes. And at that point, I'm more summarizing all the information and really tightening it all up. And the key thing is, as I'm doing that, I'll go through the lesson too. So I write down my information, and then I go through the lesson based on that information, and I'll probably tweak the information as I go through, because there's times where maybe there's extra things that I want to add, or a little bit of key takeaways that I'm discovering myself, or other information I learned outside of that lesson. So I'm encapsulating all of that into the final notes that I'll store on Evernote or OneNote or wherever it wants to be, but that is the final stuff. So the information you write on paper, and I am notorious, I have probably 100 notepads in the studio with me right now. I'm notorious for writing stuff down, and it isn't necessarily that I'm ever going to look at those notes again. It's because the mental process that I go through when I'm writing the information down. So it's the same way that when I write this information down, once I write the information down, I will actually type out the final version of that, and like I said, update it as I need to, and that's the final output. I'll probably never look at my notes again, but having written those notes was a critical part to me actually understanding and processing the information in the first place, so that way the type notes are more something that will help it stick, but it's because I've gone through the paper process first. Finally, once I've typed it all out and I've gone through the lesson step by step, I'll then go and do it all from scratch based on entirely just my notes. In other words, what I prefer to do is apply it to a brand new project if I can. The reason for that, and as an example, if I were to do we'll stick with the theme, building destruction, where I went through someone else's lesson, after the lesson's complete, I'm going to go and hopefully build my own building shot from scratch and go through the lesson again and repeat it. Now, the reason for that is for the fact that doing it yourself in its own environment, you're going to run into your own problems that you might not have had otherwise. And this is important because when you go into production, you're not going to be dealing with the same situation that you did in your lesson. So the scale might be different, the scenario, the model, all of the factors are going to change. And if you just know how to do it to that one environment, you're really going to trip up when it comes to recreating it in a whole different scenario. But as part of the learning process, reapplying everything that you learn to your own shot, to your own piece of work, your own outcome is really important. So that way you run into your own problems that you wouldn't have run into otherwise. So bit by bit, you're going to ask more questions, you're going to run into different issues that you need to resolve, and that's the additional part of that process. And again, this is why you have your digital notes, because you can continue to update them as you go based on what you're trying to do. In addition to that, ask questions on forums or on Facebook or whatever, post your work and say, hey, do you have any ideas? But more importantly, you can say, hey, I've got this one issue, I'm trying to do this thing, anyone got any ideas? People are always going to share that little extra insight like, hey, you know what, the way you're doing it there is really cool, but if you just use this other operator instead, it's actually much faster and gives you the same result. People are going to give you the icing on the cake, that little bit extra, but you wouldn't know what questions to ask if you haven't actually done the work first. So it's only once you've got all the work completed out, that then you can go through and begin to revise and refine what you're doing by communicating with other people, just nerding out, talking to friends, saying, hey, you know, I was just checking out the volume breaker node and it's really cool, I'm doing all stuff with it. It's like, well, you know what, it's even better when you start setting up conditions and being able to break stuff even more based on velocity, size, threshold, and all these other factors as well. So you get the idea. The whole point is that once you get to the finish line, you can then look at how else you can improve upon what you've already done. So keep that in mind, that you should be posting your work regularly and you should be updating it, and you should be also getting feedback, but also talking with people about your process and getting insights and getting input from other people as well, but only when you get to that stage. Okay, so first, let's recap on everything that we've covered. First, we want to have a reason for learning any subject. This way, everything we do is measurable and is applied to this set goal. We have a set expectation that everything applies to. And because of this, it's measurable. Limit yourself to 1 or 2 primary resources. This way, you're able to go all in and learn everything on that subject from these people, these schools, and their way of learning, rather than having too many experts and finding a lot of information conflicts and not really sure who you should trust. It's more about taking that leap of faith when you find that 1 or 2 resources that you completely trust, and blocking out all the other noise and doubling down on them. This doesn't mean that you can't Google answers to questions and look up bits and pieces, but as your primary resource, you want to invest in 1 or 2, and everything else is supplementary to that. Have a desired outcome or goal. Everything that you apply this learning to should be applied to a specific outcome, a specific goal, whether it is that I want to blow up a building, or I want to create a realistic animated dinosaur. Whatever you're doing, everything that you're learning should be to accomplish this one specific goal. This means that you know once you've achieved it, and you know that everything you've done is tested, rather than assuming that you know the subject and then running into issues down the line. This will force you to ask more questions and learn more specifically around this subject by being in the trenches and needing to accomplish this. It also means that you know once you've learned and achieved what you set out to do. Have a timeline to accomplish all of this. Parkinson's law states that a task will expand or shrink based on the finite time available. Having a compressed timeline to apply everything to will force you to learn at an accelerated rate. It will force you to stay on point and to focus on what's important rather than going down the rabbit hole, learning unnecessary things. You'll always need to check back in with how much time you have to set out and do something. What gets measured gets managed. Having a timeline, having a set goal, having set expectations allows us to measure and stay on point. Become obsessed and fully immerse yourself in the training. This means when you learn something, you're not just reading a book. You're listening to podcasts, you're watching YouTube videos. You're learning everything you can from every single channel that's supplementary to your specific primary resources. This means when you go for a walk, when you're at the gym, when you're waiting for your train, you're learning all day, every day about this subject and becoming a sponge for every piece of information you can find on the topic. Okay, I hope you found that valuable. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel right now. Just click the subscribe button. Also, something you're going to be interested in is I regularly put out a lot of free visual effects classes, guides, even on negotiating, and other valuable content that I only share with my subscribers. So head over to my website, ALLANMcKay.com, and sign up for my newsletter. It's free, so ALLANMcKay.com, and you'll have access to free guides, my podcast where I interview a lot of industry leaders such as VFX supervisors at ILM, Weta, and many other leading studios, as well as feature film directors and even game studios like id Software and Epic, as well as doing roundtables with a lot of visual effects teams specifically around movies that they've worked on and a lot of other cool information like that, as well as, of course, free email templates, masterclasses, and other high-value training. So again, ALLANMcKay.com, and sign up for my free newsletter. Okay, so I want to turn it over to you. What is your ways of learning and retaining information? When you watch a tutorial, when you read a book, do you take notes? What's your process? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as well, and also any other key insights that you want to share. Thanks for watching.